citizens,
de la ciudadanía, de la
and
sociedad
it's this
civil.
part of society
Y es esta parte de la sociedad que tiene que
that must
contribuir
contribute
a la
to the
formación
formation
de
of institutions of
de
a
un
lawful
Estado de
state.
Derecho. Sin esto,
Without this,
no
it
va a
won't
pasar.
happen.
Y esto
And
era
this
la
was the
base
fundamental basis of
fundamental del
Avina's work.
trabajo de Avina. Bueno, la verdad es que todo
Well, the
empezó
truth
con
said it all
mi
started
idea
with an idea
de
of
pasar un
taking
año
a sabbatical
sabático
year
después de 15 años de
after 15 years
trabajo
of very
muy
intense
intenso de
business
ensayo.
efforts.
Y justo cuando iba a
Just when I was
organizar
organizing
el
that sabbatical
vino
year,
Maurice Strong, quien era el
Maurice Strong, who was the Secretary General of the Earth
buscando
Summit,
un
came looking for an
asesor
advisor
representando
to
al
represent the
sector privado.
industrial private sector, and I found the
Me
topic
interesó el
interesting.
tema, siempre me había interesado.
I've always been interested in sustainable development,
Y lo vi como
and I saw it as an
oportunidad
opportunity to step
pasar,
away from business
salir un poco de los negocios y pasar el tiempo
for a
en otra
while.
cosa.
And something
Así
else.
empezó todo.
So it all
La idea
began.
era al comienzo
idea was
que
that
iba a
I would
ser
support
una tarea
with
de
an
asesor,
advisory role,
pero luego iba creciendo
a lot
mucho
and quickly.
y rápido para terminar con
with the creation of
la
the World
creación del
Business
Business
Council
Council
for
for Sustainable Development, un grupo que reunía
a group that included
unos
50
50
business
líderes
from all
empresariales de
sectors.
todos los sectores. Y juntos
Together we worked
trabajamos en
on all
todos los
issues
temas que casi todos,
that
para
were
todos,
almost all
eran
new to everyone.
novedosos, porque el sector
Because the
privado
private
no
sector
había
had not
manejado
handled
este
these
tipo
kinds of matters
de
before.
asuntos. Entonces se
So we
trataba de
organized
organizar
conferences,
conferencias,
conducted
investigaciones y terminamos
And we had a
con
variety.
escribir el libro Cambiando el
The book
Rumbo.
Changing Course.
Y esto al final
In the end, it
resultaron
was
2 años
2 years of intense
trabajo
work,
intenso, de viajes continuos.
continuous travel,
Y
and finally,
bueno, al final, en junio del
in
92,
June
tuvimos
1992, we
la
had the
impresión
impression
de
of
haber
having done something
hecho
important for the world. I wanted to do something in my life that had meaning, and for this it had to be on a certain scale, related to the size of the continent, to appear something visible at all. Connection with this. The fact that a philanthropic foundation of such magnitude had never been created before, people didn't have this conviction. But hopefully now, perhaps based on my example, there will be more who would do it. There are countless achievements of Avena and its leaders, of joint ventures of Avena with leaders that encouraged me a lot, that give me a lot of pleasure and satisfaction. At this stage of life, I'm retired. I look back rather than forward. And I see what I've done, what I've achieved, what I've tried, where I've failed. And the truth is that there are many very encouraging initiatives, very encouraging. Well, the creation of a VIVA Trust was to ensure the continuation of the idea and activity beyond my natural life. This was a concept I had previously had. It was a project limited in time, 15 years, when we started Avena, which would have ended around 2010 or so. And this did not happen because we realized it was an endless project. We had to find a way to organize it. The answer was Viva Trust. When I was looking for solutions to ensure Avena's continuity, I tried to understand the models that existed throughout the United States and Europe. And in the end, I found 3 or 4 models that interested me. Models with a certain combination of a productive part with a philanthropic part. The models are clear. You have a company with a foundation that owns the company, etc. In the end, evaluating all this with the experiences that were accessible seemed like the perfect solution for our case. The creation of the trust with the productive and philanthropic components. It's a creation of mine that I don't think exists anywhere in quite the same way. I never found a similar model, and I think it's worked very well. Again, I reiterate that humans are the decisive factors. The people on the boards of the organizations, the ones who manage them, if they share common values, have a shared vision, and each has their role, so they don't have to engage in internal power politics, then it can work very well. Our model, for our case, has worked well. If we intend to allocate funds from a company to philanthropic, purposeful work for the common good, we must uphold high standards of conduct for the organization. This led to the concept of the triple bottom line. And my own companies, what later became the Trust's company, had to respect this concept of the triple bottom line. What I call positive contagion was what I expected. I hope that some models, some examples of success, some successful social leaders would influence and motivate others to get involved in their own projects. And I think with time, a critical mass of people who motivate and support each other emerges. From the very beginning, we aim to build networks to help connect different leaders within countries with others. I think we're talking about networks before the term became popular. Like today with social networks, they didn't exist. Email had just started. It was one of the pioneers of email. I usually had to give a tip to the night porter at a hotel to unplug the fax and plug in my computer to retrieve email from the server in Switzerland. This was our level of communication. The idea of networks already existed in the Venus language in 1998. The leaders of organizations today, I would say, keep trying hard with an open mind, prepare for change and evolution, and turning your mistakes into lessons learned. Thank you. Every time I hear Stefan speak, I feel grateful that he ended up falling in love with our Latin America and that it was with our region that he engaged with. And I also feel inspired to keep building a way of innovation and learning towards sustainability. Thank you, Stefan, truly. Now, so can tell us a bit of more details about the Viva Trust story. I have the honor to introduce you to Roberto Artavia. He met Stefan in 1992 with INCAE, gave him a PhD honoris causa, which for the last 20 years it's been linked with Viva Trust, first as a protector and from 2008 and on as its president. And it's one of its closest allies, creating a very strong bridge between Latin America and Switzerland, and following the step of Stefan with his commitment with the region's sustainability and his impact as well. Welcome, Mr. Roberto. Good morning, everyone. The most important achievement, I may have it in front of me, a meeting of representatives from this continent's countries working together, innovating towards sustainability. And with that bridge that Shannon just mentioned, towards Switzerland, where we've received not just a lot of support and an example, but also the strategic guide of a formidable group of people who, after all this time, are still working with us. When I was working with Shannon and with the entire Viva Idea team, trying to see how to set up this meeting at a reasonable scale, but that would also be representative, our thing was discriminating because Stefan's impact in this region is very deep. The amount of lives his organization has, he himself has touched throughout time, is so large that it's impossible to make justice to it. So the first thing I want to say is that I'm very happy to say for the ones who are here, and I'm sad also that not all the ones who should be here to celebrate Stefan's trajectory and his work in the region, that for the ones who are not here as well. So at the end of the video, he was saying to the organization's leaders, keep trying. Well, that's why we're gathered here today. This is our 20th anniversary, and I was commenting yesterday in the last conversation with Esteban. He would say 20 years is nothing in the context of sustainability of the continent. It's just a little bit of time. So we're here to dream the following 10 years, the transition towards a new generation of leaders that will hopefully continue this work, learning, challenging each other, creating new ideas, and really contributing to sustainability in all possible forms. Oh, I think I'm in the way. That's why I couldn't see. Well, one of the beautiful things of celebrating the 20th anniversary is that we're back to the starting point. On October the 9th and 8th on 2003, we got together at this campus and we celebrated the launching with the symposium on philanthropic and development. Walking the talk, it was a very important word for Stefan because when we completed the summit in Rio, he committed to leaving a deep impact on a global scale with sustainability. And how he said at the end, in order to do this beyond his life, seeing the time wouldn't be enough for him, so creating a mechanism, a platform, an instrument from which that work could keep going now in the hands of all of us, because it's very easy to imagine that this maybe has a hierarchic structure in which the Viva Trust is in charge. And you'll see that at the end of this presentation, I will share with you our strategic guide for organizations, but mostly we depend on independence, creativity, diversity of the leaders that we work with so that we can truly touch on every aspect that must. Stefan, back then, he didn't just launch the trust, but in a very clear way, he tried to plant an example so that other executives with available resources could not just follow his example or model in a specific way, but in a general way of there being a superior responsibility for those of us who have access to education, resources, networking to contribute beyond simply doing the little piece of work that we got to do day by day, and also to multiply ourselves in these human networks that he mentioned to make a difference that will live beyond all of us. In that occasion, some friends got together. These are the speakers of that day. For those of you who don't know them, Hernando de Soto, I was thanking his constance yesterday. He was at the beginning of Stefan's contact with Latin America in 87, 88. He was at the launching of the VIVA Trust, and he is present today here, joining us once again, Dr. Oscar Arias, ex-president of Costa Rica, Maria Emilia Correa, who presented the triple baseline in Grupo Nueva back then, Sushmita Ghosh, who was the executive director of Ashoka, an organization that had served as an inspiration to Stefan at the time of setting the model for Avena, James Wolfenson, president of the World Bank. And Stefan was telling back then about that he was his first employer that gave him a job when he came out of school. He was just a year working for him, but he was always grateful, and they kept a relationship going throughout history. John Sixon, who was the second president of the World Council for Sustainable Development, which is the organization of the great corporations at the global level that Stephen founded after the Summit of the Earth in Rio de Janeiro in order to fulfill the promises, walk the talk. And Mr. Fuchs, who was the first president of VIVA Trust, and frankly, a person who inspires us with his vision, with his gift for people, capacity for articulating networks, and to me at least, with his very particular sense of humor. And at that time, we were representing Inkai, Pitso Bionting, who was also the one who brought Stefan here in '93 to give him an honoris causa PhD, and myself, who I don't understand why Stefan chose me, but he brought me in to this organization and he changed my life forever. So, a unique experiment model of sustainable philanthropy was presented to the world. The idea is that a productive organization that was modernized, whose strategy had to create an increasing value for their clients, their collaborators, their providers, their suppliers, that will truly work as a triple base line, creating a lot of wealth, creating utilities if possible in order to sustain philanthropy, that we must carry forth a mechanism to fulfill promises without a doubt. This was not just a commercial global council that he would bring others to create an initial network, but he was putting their own efforts inside of an organization of his own creation in order to fulfill his promises. The convergence of productive and philanthropic efforts of Stefan in the United States. And we will think for a second. One of the most fascinating things is that today we're sitting here, we're representatives of companies. I'm not just talking about the Maciza directors and the Grupo Nueva ones, who are very welcome always, but among all of you, there's a lot of business people who are conducting productive activities day after day, and yet through the contact with the trust, we're all conscious and also active in projects of sustainability that go way beyond us, and the platform on which there's a projection of Stefan's legacy on the region and the world. And this is another very important part. Stefan was saying, learn from mistakes, learn from success. And one of the main things that we've been doing that we hope start to become representing with more materialities to formalize, recognize, and document the legacy, and also to start sharing it amongst us and with the world in a broader sense, so that it will really go beyond this wonderful effort that we've been doing in the region.
Thank you. And here we see the first Directive Council of Viva Trust, Antonio Espinosa, that joins us today. Remember, he's the tall gentleman at the left, Wenceslao Casares, a young entrepreneur from Argentina in technology, one of those that started with the technological revolution a lot before that it became the norm, and really brought a different modern vision of the world created in Patagonia. How did he become a technical genius? I have no idea, because he was raised in a sheep farm somewhere in Patagonia, and from there he contributed wonderfully. Jonathan Lash, that at that point was the president of the World Resources Institute, one of the organizations that Stefan had supported in his career in managing climate change, and of course Stefan and Peter Fox. At that point, I served as a protector, a role that Mark Bridges has today, and let it be said that I'll tell you a little bit more further on about what the protector role is about, but fundamentally is guaranteeing that we are maintaining ourselves loyal and focused on the vision and the intention of the founder. Despite Stefan provided great liberty, to the extent that the last time I asked him to update what is called the strategic guidance letter, he told me, you do it, because it's now your point. It's no longer my vision, now it's the organization and how you want to project it. The values that were identified as essential components of our DNA, and here I'll stop for a second to tell you the following. This is not that we sat down and see how we invented a list. Here we did a series of interviews, important ones, with people of the entire network. Many of you were interviewed, I'm sure. But aside from interviews, we did a deep analysis. We met, or you met actually, Felipe, Lucian, and many of the team to, like they were saying, to code, integrate, and set up a model that summarized this in the values that truly represent the DNA. DNA is the essence of any organization, any organism. And in our case, we talk first about the connection between society and enterprises. And when we talk about enterprise, we're talking about productive and social enterprises and all those entrepreneurships that are called to create positive value for humanity, and how this have a connection with sustainability, with society. So that's why we talk about the triple baseline. That's why by the end of the 90s, at the beginnings of this century, we launched with Stefan a regional movement of social responsibility at an enterprise level that came very natural to us. Vina did in South America, he did that within CAI in Central America. And I remember being, for example, with Germán Castellanos, that I saw him around there in Tucumán, launching an event of social responsibility with the Foundation of Tucumán, where we received over 700 people at that point to start talking about a concept that already existed, but the way that it was stated from a triple baseline was innovative and challenging for each of the organizations that were present there. Also, obviously, we're focused on impact. And you would say, impact is something very common today. We talk about investments in impact, and everyone talks about impact here and there, and that's true. However, if you look at it, what Stefan has taught us to measure and what he taught us to focus on, and I'll talk about measure metrics in a while, that's results. Sorry to say it in English, and this Avina does it very, very well, because when they evaluate their performance, they evaluate perform process achievements of level 1 and 2 that are real impacts in micro or greater social groups, but in the end, they evaluate the impact in a deep way, which are sustainable transformations through time of a topic of their interest and that benefit greater groups of populations. And really, for us, the impact has been nature from the beginning, the index of social progress that since 2009 we created with Greece. It doesn't measure how much a country spends in education and health, or how many or which laws they have. It measures if there's really inclusion or inclusivity of minorities, how many people graduate, what quality of educational system, what's the life expectancy, what's the mortality rate, how many people leave without a home. These are results variables because we have always been focused on the impact. I remember with Marviva, and there's a lot of people from Marviva here, that is the organization, the newest organization within the trust, that literally there were divers counting hammer sharks above their heads, because it was not just establishing a marine line of X square kilometers, it was ensuring that biodiversity and nature were sustained in practical terms and in terms of results. So for us, the impact is nature since the beginning. And now we also have very interesting platforms, investments of impact and dynamics of impact, measurements of impact. And we're, I would say, in an ideal moment to propose and share our models. Disruption and attitude facing risk. One of the most interesting things of the organizations in our group is that we have learned not only to innovate, but to try, and this verb doesn't exist, try to be disruptive. That does exist. I would say disruptions, but we've tried to be disruptive and changing the usual structures to achieve different results, and that very often implies clashing with the status quo or organizations, laws, institutional structures that protect the past instead of focusing on the needs for the future. And that's risky That oftentimes results in a significant pushback. It results in questioning. It results in also many failures and many learnings. But that attitude, facing change and risk, is essential to truly move that needle in a different way to what would be done by different organizations. Inclusive collaboration, this is essential. We are an organization, and I mean everything. It's inclusive, it should be diverse and representative of the biodiversity, wonderful biodiversity of ecosystems that exist in Latin America. There's a song that talks about this being the region of diversity and that it will make the South our North, trying to make the affirmation that is that environmental richness, the diversity of life, diversity of societies from originating peoples to immigrants of all the parts of the world that have enriched us and project us to another level, and that really, if we learn to include, to work and collaborate, we're going to be able to achieve different levels of results. Passion and mystique, without a doubt, I think that when you hear Shannon, I hope when you hear me also, but you tell me that, you have to feel that commitment, that emotion. This is not just a talk for us. This is the structure and the guide of our lives. Courage, uh, bravery in decision making, and bravery that with me starts with Stefan when he challenges his own family in terms of asbestos with all the consequences that has had, and courage that since then has been exemplary to really not only be disruptive, not only be inclusive, not only working for impact, but truly challenge the status quo in societies in a direct manner when this doesn't represent justice that should be represented in the development models. Modesty, despite this discourse, not looking for recognition, and in that sense, Stefan and Viva Trust, I think, have been modest. As organization, we keep a relatively low profile, and one that we only want to change towards the future. It's not going out to tell our story and say that we're wonderful. It's sharing our knowledge and learnings to make it really transcend and have a higher impact to what we would have if we do it only at home. And as Stefan said, Latin America is a roller coaster. It's a sequence of highs and lows, that's what he said. And well, when he did the recording, obviously we were in a high. Now we're in a situation that's complex at a political level in most countries. We're in the middle of a global situation with geopolitical conflicts that are truly tragic in Ukraine, in Middle East, in parts of Africa, and in that sense, we have to be resilient in the context. And certainly we have been in the productive, we have been in social, environmental, but particularly to go to this back to the starting point, understanding that the true change takes time, and that within 10 or 20 years we would have taken other significant steps, but possibly now sustainability, total sustainability, is a goal and a dream. We're in this context that has been called the context of volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous in a plain world that's interconnected, that's demanding, and in need. And when I say need, let's not lose focus that there's 3,100 million people that don't fulfill their basic needs every day. It's very demanding because we have to deal with technology, climate change, social pressure at the same time that we are productive, at the same time that we are innovating, interconnected, undoubtedly. Maybe the most recent example was the pandemic and the speed at which this spread throughout the world. But obviously, it also refers to the exchange of information and claim. Yesterday, we were having lunch in a hotel close to the campus, and the butter that they served us were capsules of New Zealand butter. And here, 3 kilometers away, we have the plant of the Dos Pinos producer, which is the most productive dairy producer, certainly in Central America, that is very competitive, modern, and has capsule of half an ounce of butter. imagine how plain is the world that the dairy industry in New Zealand can uh, compete one-to-one with Dos Pinos in a hotel in San Jose in Costa Rica. This thing doesn't exist, and this is a great challenge and a great opportunity at the same time. What is our mandate? And with this, I'm going to be closing. In first place, the model of Viva Trust should present a combination of entrepreneurial and philanthropic activities, and this is not going to change now or at any point in the future, at least while we, those who are in the front today, are driving the organization. For us, the productive success, independently of the highs and lows that we face in the markets, but the productive success defined as moving from a commodities company to an added value and created value and delivered to clients closer to the end client is a transformation of what Latin America should be. Yesterday, Hernando de Soto was talking to us about the Economist published recently in one of their publications that Latin America was the mine of commodities for the world that we were going to become, where the natural resources were going to flow to the rest of the world. And I told him afterwards, because that's what we've always felt, and he agreed with me. Hopefully, we don't export commodities. This is not about exporting copper stones or unprocessed soy or exporting cattle in its most primitive way, but really to capture all the possible value, to get the closest to the end client and create truly value chains that are sustainable. And it says that the organization should develop their own campaigns of positioning and communication to incide on the strategic thinking in their field of action. And again, this is not self-promoting. This is not visibility just for the sake of it. This is ensuring that our learning and knowledge transcends us as an organization and they reach others. The creative, innovative, and quality solution of the challenges that are faced in the topics tackled on by each organization in the ecosystem is key as an element of the strategy. We don't want to make it common. We want to be disruptive, but not in the destructive sense, but in the sense of changing the parameters of development, of productivity, of social distribution, of social progress, of all that which is going to make this region a region that's sustainable in environmental, social, and productive terms. The organization should be recognized publicly amongst the best in class. And again, this is not like when we start putting ads on the highways to become popular. Being best in class means that the markets in which we operate recognize us as such. Yesterday we saw in the presentation of Avina that for every dollar that Viva Trust invests in Avina, Avina leverages 7 times in other donors. Well, that is the type of performance that we aspire to, that recognizes as best in class. That they're 7 to 1 in terms of credibility, what do we see inside in regards to what, now I'm going to say, the market of donors perceives that is best in class. The support receipt, well, this is what I just mentioned, so I won't repeat it. All organizations should have a focus, the building of a robust capital. I shouldn't be talking about that more than what I have in front of me. This is social capital. Seeing people here that were in the beginnings of Viva Trust, seeing Hector Vargas here that started with Fundes in the 80s, seeing here friends of all the countries in the continent, literally, that meet not only to celebrate with us, but to help us think about the future. That's precisely having this robust social capital. One of the nicest things I've had to do is that when in 2009 we had the formal accusation against Stefan, a letter was signed by 400 Latin American leaders. I had to raise many of those signatures to present it first to Stefan so he understood the support that existed in the region, but also so it helped as a reference of character, to put it somehow. Well, the list of those 400 people is truly impressive, not only because of who they are who signed that list, but because of the diversity, because there we had from indigenous women in La Puna that had worked and benefit of a project of Avina to 6 or 7 presidents of Latin American nations and everything in between in terms of what you would recognize as relative importance in a common society. But in Stefan's society, one weighs as much as the other, and that social capital is what is absolutely wonderful and should be representative of our efforts. Transparency and accountability, of course, and a focus in the transformation of sustainability long term. And remember that we talk about today sustainability as a multidimensional concept that even if it has in its heart the relation between natural resources and social progress, it recognizes the fundamental role of the enterprise as creator of richness, value, commerce, productive value as an essential part of the model. It recognizes the innovation and the technology as fields where we should be focusing on. It recognizes the empire of law and good economical policies as an essential part, and also the creation of a social contract that's robust, characterized by values that allow relations and transactions that are fluid and low cost between any two members in society. We are not even close of this ideal that I just described of multidimensional sustainability, and that's why we'll continue working for another 10 or 20 years. This makes us become excellent in risk management, both as an enterprise as well as NGO fronts. We have to be excellent in managing knowledge, which means very clearly to share this legacy of knowledge, the lessons learned are not only within the organization of the groups, but with the entire world. Loyalty to Latin America and pay attention to these organizations by demands they're expanding to Africa, for example. There's no issue with that. But our main focus from the perspective of Viva Trust continues to be sustainability of Latin America to empower that model that was recognized by Stefan. That model that last night was stated by Hernando, where this great mass of resources, biodiversity, natural riches, human riches really can become a source of transformation for the region and a tangible connection to Viva Trust and the figure of Shimitaini. But I insist, this is not to project us or Stefan as a leader, a holy man or legend or whatever. This is just when you design your strategy, you don't lose sight of the values and the history of our own organizations and the trust, because these are an essential part of the DNA that I shared with you some moments ago. This is a photograph we took at my house a few months ago, where we have those that are called to drive more directly the organizations of the trust today. Of course, in the productive aspect, Andreas and Alejandro. That, by the way, thank you very much, Alejandro, not only because important part of the directive group is here, because there's an important group of executives that help us create that bridge between productive, environmental, and social. Andreas Storger, Heinz, Christian, who, aside from the role that they have in the ICFBO Trust, they oversee the Nueva Group dynamics and the relation with the productive side of the organization, without a doubt. We have Elfid Torres, who represents Fundes. We have Jorge Jimenez, Caterina Arroyo, that should be around. We don't have Catherine in the photo, but Catherine substitutes Jorge as executive director of Malviva in January, and Jorge becomes a directive of the organization. Of course, Paul Rice, president of Fairtrade USA, and who Stefan himself invited to be part of the second generation of the AC of Viva Trust. Gabriel Barakat, that unfortunately, due to a health situation in his family, had to cancel his trip last minute, and who is the executive director of Avina, Sean McCagan, the president of Avina, that joins us also. Urs Jagger and Shannon Music, who along with the entire team of Viva Trust are responsible for the management of knowledge and everything that you see here today. Mark Bridges, who I already mentioned as our protector, and who truly, I would say, is a guide and a support that's fundamental in the vision and the loyalty of this whole organization to the initial document. And I don't think I'm missing any. I didn't mess it up today. Oh, Sean McCagan already mentioned it. And Shannon too? No? I'll better ask because yesterday I messed up when I was saying hi. And of course, no, I already said Christian also. Christian is the Christian I mentioned even in the following way as part of those who help us from Grupo Nueva, managing Grupo Nueva as CFO of the trust, but also I always tell that it's the most constant presence that we have in the group. In 1993, when we went to present to Stefan the first proposal from Incae, he was Christian was sitting there that had like 10 years, was about 10 years old at that point and represented part of the organization that by then. So this group is here today with us, and hopefully, and I really mean this, in the second rotation and the third generation of leaders of Viva Trust that probably are amongst you, then we can continue as loyal to the vision of Stefan as we have been so far. This photograph that I'll close my presentation with really caught the attention of some people because why did I think about putting Stefan with a helmet here? This was taken the visit to a plant of Maciza in Chile some years ago. And you don't only see the great happiness of Stefan at that point of being in contact with the production, being in contact with the workers, with the executives, etc. But for me, that helmet in a way represents that Stefan has not been a visionary of desk. He was always willing, not only obviously to put his money and his investment in what he believed in, but to become an active part of the transformation that he was looking for. And this is part of what I hope to inspire in all of us for in the workshop that we're going to have in the following days. We don't think that it's just, creating some guidelines, but really put on that helmet and go out to work. So sustainability in the region is possible. Thank you very much and very good day. And we're going to start immediately with the first panel. The bad news is that I'm the moderator, but the good news is the moderator is silent most of the time. The good news is that we have a formidable representation of those who will be joining us. Brizio Biondi. Brizio, aside from being president of ABINA, director of ABINA, dean of Incae, president of Incae, founder of the Social Progress Index, and truly a transformed. It's a personal mentor of mine that's very important, significant, one of the persons that has incited the most in my professional life. So I'll take an advantage to thank you for that and invite you to the stage. In second place, Antonio Espinosa. Antonio, he always laughs when I say this, but I mean it. He's an atomic cattle producer. He's a nuclear engineer educated in England that's dedicated to many things in Paraguay, but particularly to be an example of discipline, kindness, initiative, entrepreneurship, example of his country, and also my landlord for a while, because when I traveled to Paraguay, Diane and Antonio received me very happily in their home, which I've always thanked them for. Please, Antonio, if you can join us. Sean McCagan, and Sean, I met him maybe 12 or 13 years ago as an executive director of Avina Foundation. He then moved on to become its president, and in him I recognize, aside from a great creativity, a great strategic vision that has allowed Avina not only to transcend in terms of its impact in the region, but to start creating new organizations. I call it Walk the Talk, but it's really called World Transforming Technologies. So World Transforming Technologies and Investor in Technology, where he has taken Avina with Maneto, and things that you could say are moonshots, and perhaps they are, but they could potentially change the world. So I not only admire his capacity of networking and management, but also the vision and that encouragement to become disruptive and challenge us to dream and go beyond. And Paul Rice, who I already mentioned as the founder of Fair Trade USA, wasn't able to be here, so we have Mick Jagger in his place here. But in any case, Paul, a dear friend, we always laugh a lot because aside from a great personal friendship, Paul speaks Spanish like a Nicaraguan from the Esteli Mountains where he came to work and create coffee cooperatives in the 80s. And from there, he projected himself to become today a true world leader of the fair trade movement, a person that I admire quite a bit, not only because his vocation of transforming markets in the world, but because of the great commitment of starting in the mountains with just his backpack and an idea and being today one of the people that helps transform the world. And of course, I'm going to sit there in the middle to moderate, but I would like, Bricio, if you don't mind, I would like to start with you, making the following question. Tell us a little bit, Bricio, about how your relation with Stefan started and how you have seen the change of the presence of Stefan and the impact of the presence of Stefan when we met him in that year 1992 in Panama. Well, I wasn't prepared for that, but it should be relatively easy to tell. Um, as a dean of any institution, any educational institution, part of the task is to fundraise, get money. So I remembered that when I started becoming a dean, hey, why don't you contact this person? Seems that he's interested in Latin America and has a lot of money. Those things you hear very often from many people. And yeah, it came in one ear and it came out the other, but I never did anything. And one day, I'm invited to a conference in Panama, which I understand is the most important conference of the private sector, of the entrepreneurial sector in Panama. That traditionally is inaugurated by the President of the Republic. Then in the afternoon, we have a guest of honor, the main speaker, and then a second one, and then it's closed, and the following morning the real workshop starts. Well, it turns out that the note speaker was precisely Stefan. And I said, oh, well, I'm finally meeting this person. And the second one was myself. And what he said, he talked about a sustainable development. I loved that. It was the first time I heard what he was saying. They asked me to talk about business ethics, where the issue in corruption, which is a little bit all over the world, was something that they wanted to look up close. It seems that Stefan liked it, what I said. So after that meeting, the president very kindly invited him and myself to have dinner with him. And I have to admit that at the end of that dinner, or towards the end of the dinner, Stefan surprised me because he told the president, Mr. President, could you give us the kindness of give us a room next door where this gentleman and I could talk a little bit more? He said, of course. So there we were in the presidential house until 2 a.m. talking, Stefan and myself. And the president went to sleep.
Towards the end of that meeting, tells me, hey, when are you going to be in Zurich? A few months later, I saw him there, and a year, 2 years went by like that. If I extend myself, please stop me. So at the end, we became friends. And as such, I told him, and this was at the Harvard Club of New York, I remember, Stefan told me, going to have a a toothache. I'm supposed to ask money to you. So why don't we talk about that for 2 minutes, yes or no, and then we switch topics. I told him, yeah, go ahead. Ask 10 millions from him. He thinks about it for a minute. 10 millions back then were way more than they are now. He tells me, okay. And then we switch topics. The night he left to Washington, he had a meeting the next day with Larry Summers, who back then was Ministry of Treasury of the United States. I stayed there at the club. I had some things to do in New York. But at 7 a.m., a bit earlier maybe, Stefan calls me and tells me, hey, can you take a plane tomorrow? My agenda is very loaded. But we could at least have breakfast because I forgot something to tell you. Tell him, yeah, of course. I go to Washington. We have half an hour for a quick breakfast next day. And he tells me, look, I'm not scared of signing a $10 million check, but I think it would hurt Inkai if I gave it so much money because that could weaken instead of strengthening Inkai. Strong relationships, strong organizations are those who are hungry. The ones who are hungry, not the ones who are at rest. So I tell him, look, Stefan, I totally agree with you. But it doesn't apply here. And why doesn't it apply here in this case? Because we don't need your money. And, well, by coincidence, that year Inkai had the maximum surplus. It wasn't that much, but it was the historic maximum back then. So why am I asking you for it? So that we can make that we can get to that plus that nobody else is able to do, because with what we have, we work 24 hours a day, and beyond that, we can do that much more. There's not enough, and we say, if we could have only been able to do that, and it's that 5 to 10% that makes all the difference. We can do what we never have time to do, and that at the end ends up being the most important. So I don't want to convince you, I tell him. I don't want to convince you. As a member of the, put yourself in the position of the Incai's directive board, and if I say something wrong about this, please forget about the 10 million. And well, that's how it started. The similar question, Antonio, in general terms. So what's been your relationship with Stefan like? How was it born? And what has came out of that relationship? Small parenthesis, the finals donation is documented in a little book that I wrote in 2007 when I got out of the deanship. $28.3 million was the result of the project. So you really convinced him. Yes, he had the vision. It was the vision. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation to be here. After so many years, we're getting together with great friends who we haven't seen in a long time. Our relationship started through VIVA when the local Avinas were organized in the various countries. There was an Avina in Paraguay. I was invited to be a member of the Council of Avina, Paraguay. And from there, we've been relating. I had the chance to meet Stefan fleetingly during that time. And then, after some time, I get called from Avina and tell me you're gonna be in Asuncion at a specific date. I don't remember what it was because there's somebody who's coming who wants to get to know you better. And say, okay, perfect. The day comes to our house, to where we dwell, in a vehicle. Peter Fuchs and Stefan come out of the vehicle. They had flown in their jet and got to Asuncion specifically to tell me about the creation of Viva Trust and to invite me to be a member of that first AC advisory committee. Well, it was truly a surprise. It was very positive, but also challenging. I've always read, once I got incorporated with Avina, I would read things about Stefan, what he's done with the councils, etc. And I always admired a very particular aspect of him. It was his modesty, a very particular modesty in the face of the demands of the press, the interviews demands, but he always kept that low profile. Then I'll tell you a bit more about some things that's happened in our relationship. How did you get into Avina? Well, it was a very different way. Well, first, I must say I'm very, very happy to be here and to see all these faces. For many years of work in Avina, I know many of them, and also with the work of the VIVA Trust, the group's organization. It's very nice to see them. Well, I got into Avina very down on the totem pole, like someone humble who comes in to review projects. I used to live in Texas back then, and I created the Avina office in Miami, and the representations of Avina, the local ones on site, were also being created in many countries. And the idea of the Miami group was to review the projects that were getting in from the field before presenting them to the council. So I was part of, along with some individuals who are here, of that first team of Avina's due diligence. But I already knew back then that there was another reason, and the reason was that I had completed a master's degree. I wrote a book on sustainable development in Brazil, and at that time, a bit later, Avina's council had the idea of the desire of opening an Avina program in Brazil, but there was nobody in the group who spoke Portuguese. So I think, well, the first question was, what's your experience in Latin America? Well, I just wrote a book back then on sustainable development in Brazil. So they said, you're hired. So very quickly, I got into the team. I was part of the team that was developing strategy of Avina in Brazil, such a great country with the ocean, and there was some anxiety of getting lost in such a big place. So we had to find a way to operate in Brazil and to be able to show results, something concrete, some kind of impact, and not getting lost. So we worked on this strategy. We identified the leaders, Brazilian leaders, who taught us a lot about the context in the country, and we were able to present strategy to Avina's council back then, whose president was Stefan. And it was a very ambitious plan, opening 6 offices in Brazil, working the entire territory in Brazil from the start. It was a big budget, many hirings, many operations. Back then, Avina, before that, had nothing in Brazil. That was in 2001. The council approved this plan. With this, I was getting ready for another life back then, post Avina, because I'd already fulfilled the mission. And then there was a decision that was made, and they communicated with me. I was very happy, and they told me there's just one detail. The plan is only approved if you get to Brazil to implement the structure. So I had to talk with my wife, obviously. We decided to take on the challenge, but imagine something about Stefan's profile of trusting such a large program, such an ambitious program, 6 offices, to a Texan gringo guy with a tourist visa and a personal credit card. What Peter Fuchs called the tent approach, going there, camping, and creating what's needed to create a program. So that's the audacity and the capacity of trusting others, of recognizing the abilities, and also to take challenges on. And this was the attitude of our founder, and I always carry this in my heart as something that I must also transmit and share with the Venus team. Don't feel that bad. Inkai hired me for my baseball and rock and roll knowledge. That's another story. It's complicated, but I'll tell you about it someday. Please. Go ahead. Or Mick Jagger. If you can sing Satisfaction? No, not yet. Maybe after some drinks. I had the luck of meeting Stefan in 2001. We just launched a first Trade USA in the United States, maybe 3-4 partners there. We're starting it up. We're invited to present a proposal for funding. We presented it, and to my surprise, out of the blue, Stefan calls me, who's president of the foundation back then, and he took a very active role with an active interest in the various projects and the various leaders and social entrepreneurs. And we talked for over 2 hours about fair trade and why in the United States we're trying to do something that would be more innovative and different to the European model. And I remember that what caught my attention was this great curiosity, this appetite for learning that Stefan had and has, of exploring and of knowing about innovation opportunities, the ones that existed back then. And we had the great privilege of receiving considerable support from the Avina Foundation at a time where we were just starting, and it really had an impact on the fair trade path as a movement in the United States. And a few months later, I invited him to the field. Let's go see this. I didn't know if he would go, but he accepted, and we got here to Costa Rica, and we went to the Monteverde area, and we visited small coffee producers who'd organized in cooperatives and who'd certified as fair trade, and they were following the path. And I was really impressed by then for his humility. The great humility of Stefan, and his curiosity for the people, his human warmth, his appetite for deepening and knowing the model through interactions with the people. And I remember this very well because the cooperative had a very bad season, and the manager was a bit depressed. Sharing, not just the accomplishments, but also the challenges. And Stefan said something to him that I always remember. He told him, one must never stop taking advantage of a good crisis. Never let a good crisis go to waste. These are wise words that we've used many times. in this community, and I'm forever thankful for that moment. To Stefan, thanks everyone. Now, Mauricio, for what we've been getting ready. What's Stefan's impact? What's the legacy that he leaves the region? Well, after listening Stefan's words and your presentation, I think that there's not much more to say. If you ask me what's left, what remains, I feel that in the context of courage, of breaking paradigms and everything else, I think we are facing a huge challenge, and it is to become viral. We haven't been thus far because we've had to organize ourselves and see how we can do things best within each organization, and we've done amazing things. But Stefan said something that was very interesting in his presentation this morning. He said, I don't know, as a model that is like this one, I don't know anyone who's tried to do that. Neither do I. That's a task we must still do. In order to be replicable, we must improve even more from the inside. And in that sense, the role of infecting others that Fundes could have, the impact is impressive. Let me give you just an example, and I'm going to say names, even if they're evident. When Stefan founded Avina, there were no, with the exception of a Ford and Rockefeller foundations, there were no such giant foundations. Avina was maybe one of the greatest ones, if not the greatest ones in Latin America that were created back then, and with reason. But in the cycle of the new billionaires that arose, great foundations arose that were created, but there was no contact between the institution that generated that entrepreneur and the foundation that was being created. So there's a potential synergy there of colossal magnitude. That's Stefan's vision. And I would say we here have a huge possibility to be contagious. Antonio, how do you interpret the impact and the legacy of Stefan in these first 20 years? Well, I would say what we must do is to learn from Stefan. And I will learn two main things. True lessons, not just about his lives in the philanthropic aspect, but also in his business life. And it's the same learning. And it's reflected by the first two letters of VIVA that represent vision. And vision is a word that has many meanings. One's the vision of seeing visually. One has a vision that may be good, bad, one can see from up close, from afar. Then there's the other vision. It's the vision of many of our organizations and companies. It became like a mantra to talk about the mission, about the values. That vision that represents a reality, it doesn't represent what exists, but it represents an idea, an ideal. But then there is a third vision that I think it's the most significant one, and it's the vision of seeing at a distance what's coming, what are the macro trends, to use a word that's been popping, trends of what's coming from the future. And that vision of seeing far away what's coming and to modify what we do today in order to seize and to even modify to some extent. To modify to some extent, and Stephen always had that in his companies and also in the philanthropic. And I say in his companies because all of this starts with one person who became immensely fortunate financially and who then enabled him to do what he did with VIVA. He gave long-term tendencies and he took action now. For instance, when the Switzerland industries seem to be disappearing because of the competition of Japan and the electronic watches, he thought, that's not necessary. There will be another trend later. People will once again have an interest in Swiss watches as long as it adequates to an economic reality. So participated in the Swatch creation, one of the great successes of the Swiss watch industry, producing economic ones that are requested by the youth from the entire world. The same vision of seeing the importance in the environment, the importance in climatic change at a time where it was founded. When VIVA Trust was founded, there were barely no. But the reality of that tsunami that's approaching, it's becoming increasingly visible and stronger. He saw it and said, well, we have to create institutions that will prepare the world for climate change, for environmental demands. That vision of seeing what's coming from afar and acting today is the true genius of Stefan. What turned him into a billionaire on the one hand, and which has allowed us to also take actions to adequate the world to the new challenges. And I would say that's the lesson of the generation that is leading, or also the trust enterprises, the trust organizations. We must boost the quality of future vision implemented today so that the world will be better and that we're not carried by these tsunamis that are coming successfully one after another. That's the main lesson to me from Stefan. Sean? Impact and legacy or perspective. Well, I feel completely incapable of speaking of Stefan's impact in the region. It goes well beyond my knowledge. I know that impact is what motivates greater impact, so I think that's not just a VINA, it must be something about the group, of the ones that we're here for a mission. And in the last years, I've seen the importance of sharing the impact, because I remember that in the first years, and you remember this time of a low profile, there was an apprehension of telling much about what we're doing. We've changed that culture. Now we have logs, registrations, communication of the impacts. Each of the team's member registers what's going on and what's been changing, and we communicate much better than before. we can't always register some changes that are very important to me, maybe beyond something concrete like access to water or a legal reform. The impact of Stephen's thought, because it comes from certain concepts. Well, now, let me give you an example. I was in New York 12 hours ago for an event about the United Nations General Assembly. There were many foundations talking with the USAID about this new concept. It was locally led development. And I had to laugh because, come on, and there's many concepts like this that all of a sudden become a truth. But I learned them with 20 years ago. They're still trying to catch up with what he was saying 25 years ago. It's a privilege to work in an organization that doesn't just work with these concepts, but who has these concepts as part of its DNA. It's hard to separate Avena from a locally led development. It's at the essence of the organization. So I think talking about the impact of this fluency is part of the history, but I hope in order to sum this up that we're able to have a legacy of hope for the region, of always looking in chaos and in crisis, looking for opportunities there. I think that's also part of Avena's strategy now to look for the opportunity, always, because there's always crisis, and there will always be. But the organizations that know how to work with crisis, how to reinvent themselves, how to always adapt to changes, are the organizations that will be able to bring more hope for the region. Paul, legacy, impact? Seven's impact. I would say that in the first place, Stephen's impact lives in the organizations of the ecosystem he supported and that he's still inspiring. Keeping impact on Viva Idea, Mar Viva, Fundas, Avena. And beyond that, in all the social entrepreneurs and all the base organizations, grassroots organizations that are part of our movement, that are part of this broad network of VIVA Trust. The impact is huge, and we see Venus reports, for instance, we see that it's measurable impact in terms of more inclusive economies, in terms of the environmental protection, civil society, strengthening civil organizations that are fighting for democracy and regional participation. A great, big and small accomplishments that day after day are proving not just us in the ecosystem, but most importantly, the tribe that we are beyond. That they've been inspired by the vision and that they've been boosted by the support that in one way or another Stephen has left us. Let me put a little pressure because I want to double click here with you on here. For instance, Sean, I want to start with you and then I come back to Bruce Antonio and Paul. In the last 5 years, to talk about the most recent examples, Vin has presented a total of about 41 level 1 challenge in 5 years, which means projects in that year that benefit 1 million people or more directly.
What is that? What are those projects? What is this impact? What is Avena really making a difference? Well, that depends on the case because you cannot have that ambition of having such a great impact acting on your own. What Avena has learned throughout the years is that you can only talk about an achievement that has an impact over 1 million people if you work with a very diverse group of actors. With learning and many mistakes throughout the years, we have learned on how to articulate the necessary actors so they can achieve something so ambitious. In each case is different, but we have to put in the center the change that you want, and then, you know, who has to be on the table so this change happens. And it could be a change in the environment, it could be a legislation on recycling, it could be something about labor market, but the change process is the same because always involves human beings and many times communication issues, divisions, lack of trust. So Abina has become an expert in this change process of how to do everyone come to the table or several tables to define the actions collectively that are needed to create a great change. So I say that Avina has known how to create this science of articulation of actors, and only with those, because they're the ones that make the changes at the end of the day. And when we measure an achievement number one of over 1 million people, that's why the associates or partners that make this change have to recognize the contribution of Avina of we don't count that achievement. They have to say, yes, Avina did this very important role so this could happen, right? So that for me is the most important thing for impact, that others say, yes, it was without you, this doesn't happen. Mauricio, how did Inkai change after that conversation in 93, 94, and Stefan coming into our, uh, our realm? What is his impact in this organization? I love the question. I would dare say that Stefan has changed radically what the mission of Inkai is. Always, he always was more than just training managers from company. It was developing leaders in the original mission that has always been kept in a development of one kind of the other is developing those leaders. And Stefan contributed to Inkai the paradigm and the vision of sustainable development. Before he came in my perspective, we were still what we can say today a traditional business schools, clearly in leadership, because we're the kids of Harvard Business School. But the Harvard Business School itself, it's traditional in many ways. We advance quicker on that. I remember the anniversary of 35, 40 years of Inkai. We were in Harvard, you were there, and several other deans were there. And I saw, I'm not going to say names, but you know them, teachers, famous ones of Harvard, that were welling up because of the presentation. They had tears in their eyes. And why were they tearing up? A business Harvard school professor crying? I came to talk to them afterwards, and I say, look, we are unable to do what you do. We're trapped in bureaucracy. We are trapped in conventional vision. You, perhaps because you're smaller, have an agility of changing and putting up to date with what's needed today. And I said, I wish it was us. Someone from the outside told us, wake up, boys. You're gonna miss the train. And at the beginning, there was resistance. now Inca is totally on board the train, but that's a colossal contribution that Stefan did. And as a model entrepreneur, as a member of the board of directors, and as a supporter, that has transformed myself. And I believe I could say that we both have gone through this transformation together. It has been extraordinary. Antonio, if I could center you in Paraguay, how do you see that footprint of Stefan in Paraguay? What do you remember of his presence and his investments? And when I say his, I mean this entire ecosystem that he has helped create. Well, when Arena started in Paraguay, and when it started its regional dynamic, the focus was basically to identify leaders, social leaders. The idea was that the changes are not done by the organizations. Changes, the necessary changes, are produced by the leaders. So the focus, that first focus was to identify people with leadership, social leadership that were already working in different areas with a vision and with intentions that were, let's say, parallel to those of Avina, sustainable development, of realizing opportunities. This first group of leaders that were identified in Paraguay are today really, they are all significant figures, important figures that have impact each time more strongly in their sectors. And you could say, well, that was only the result of the support of Avina. The support of Avina contributed. It made perhaps it pushed for this previously existing intention. But what really marks it in different sectors in society has been through empowering leaders that had the possibility, the vision, and the capacity of transmitting and go out and communicate the needs of those changes. And that we see today are very important for our country. These are people that are doing really fantastic things, and I would say, more than perhaps this focus on the potential of people is essential, and was marked more than anything the presence of Avina in Paraguay. And Paul, from your position of privilege, in a way, as a member of AC, how do you find the impact and the footprint of Stefan and this entire ecosystem in the region since you've been participating with us, and even before in your own movement? Well, it's the power of a good example, right? Elevating our work that has been not only supporting but elevating good examples to social entrepreneurs, grassroots organizations in the region that are really gaining a real impact and creating networks that allow to take advantage of the power of a good example, and I think that's something extraordinary. And personally, let's say in the fair trade movement in the United States, I think that Stefan and his vision and his values have had a very strong impact. We learned in part of his values in regards to the disruption, innovation, boldness, that appetite for risk towards a higher impact. All those are values of our movement that, by the way, they have, in a way, a strong connection with Stefan. Okay, we have more or less 10 minutes in this panel, and what I would like to ask you, as people that have worked directly with Stefan and know him personally and very profoundly, that have been part of this ecosystem in one way or the other for the past some 30, some 20 years, what is the next step? I mean, what is the potential and the next step that this ecosystem should take to truly take advantage of these platforms that Stefan has created? And then now, in a way, he put in our hands, and I'm not calling anyone old, but probably it's going to be up to us to leave to another generation very shortly. So what is it that we want to deliver them? What is that message we want to give them on how to take advantage of this platform? I know that. Fundamentally, Stefan is a creator of paradigms, of new paradigms. A visionary you could be at micro and micro and macro level, but Stefan is primarily a creator of a new paradigm. All the time he had this mentality. At the beginning, if I remember well, he defined himself as an industrial architect. And an architect is a creator of a building that doesn't exist. The sustainable development vision that we see, that so far has fallen short in practice around the world, needs to be conscious of a change in paradigm. What does this mean? That we have to take great risks for a vision that doesn't exist, that we need to believe in it despite it not existing yet, and you really take a chance with it. Today we have a great ace under our sleeve, which is the urgency that is being created by the inertia of the world on sustainable development. And I think that here, Grupo Nueva, Avina, all the components, and VIVA as the organic way of putting together all these efforts has I would say, a mission of making this new world that's coming. We're not early adopters, but early creators of, really putting it, going all in this, with the cost that it has. It's often half the curve that take the credit and take on this, but there we have the courage of being able to do it. I would say that's something that we have learned in our relationship with Stefan, with Avina, with Grupo Nueva, and it was something that was mentioned today. Stefan mentioned it in the video of there's no uniform success. There's ups and downs always, and I think more than any time in this region is true. And we talk a lot about learning from our mistakes, and that's always very important. But let's not forget to learn about our achievements and our success. Because what we want to do in the end is to reproduce those success we've had. Then maybe we're fortuitous, maybe at the point where we made a decision and chosen a path, made an investment. We perhaps have not seen truly what was the component that made this action become successful. Let's analyze also our success. Avina is full of success. Let's analyze those successes and see truly what are the dynamics and the causes for that success to happen, and let's apply those to the next steps logically. Let's avoid, if we can, the mistakes. Let's avoid all those accidents on the way that often you cannot foresee, but that happen. But also, when we see the opportunities, let's apply what we have learned from our successes to really push for them and take from that for our next steps. I think that's something that certainly Stefan always did, and that is something that we should take advantage of. Thank you, Antonio. Paul, let me go to you so we can leave Sean last with this question. Go ahead. I think that there's the three focuses for the immediate future for our ecosystem. In first place, the adaptation. Things are changing, and the models and strategies that used to work in the past probably are not going to work in the future. So adaptation, flexibility, innovation, it's essential. Second, synergy. Here we talk about the ecosystem, and there's collaboration amongst our organizations that are present here. But I would dare say that there's a lot of opportunity to continue going deeper into that and leveraging the strengths of each organization and of those that of us that serve. And I know that these 2 days are about that. I'm going to go a little bit deeper into that after this session. The third idea that I have is around the model itself. As Stefan said in the video, it's his invention, this idea of having a productive company that is profitable, that finances in turn several organizations that are philanthropic. It's a model that has been very difficult. It's had big challenges, as we've all known. It hasn't worked as ideally as we wanted to, and we need to analyze that and see how to evolve that original concept in such a way that it's viable. Thank you very much. And Sean, again, you're the youngest one in this group. You've carried as a leader of Avina Foundation for the past years, and certainly in terms of impact, you've had to document impact that from what we've already talked about a little bit about, and it's truly wonderful. So what is the message for the next generation of Avina and all the organizations in our group in terms of what we should be aspiring to, what can we achieve? Well, I suppose that everyone in this room has answers to that question. Me attending the meetings of VIVA Trust, where there's presentations of the different organizations, I'm always surprised with the amount of impact there is all over. And sometimes I do an exercise because we're obsessed with the impact in Avina, the measurements. I make a list of all the achievements and impact number one, the entire group, and it's impressive. I think we need to communicate this more and make this communication reach mass media, because it's a reason for hope that you can do the difference. Because everything that you hear is bad news, and we have examples that, yes, there's advancement, there's things that are changing, there's improvement that's real, that people are organizing and doing something positive in the world, and we need to tell that story, because it contagious people think, perhaps there's hope. Perhaps we can do something different. So I say that perhaps we need to learn to communicate better. I think that we are trying to advance, and we have some very important examples of this in Avina. For example, we have the first time of an achievement, #1 in communication in Avina, of having had an impact through communication. The other is, I would say, assume more risk. I've always loved that from Stefan and his organizations, that appetite to assume risk. And if we that have as a profession that are dedicated to a social change, if we don't assume risks, who's going to do it? And when I talk, for example, with foundations or impact investors, because we now have some companies in innovation that Avina has there to launch with some allies and partners. We've gotten into the water, learning, making mistakes. You don't need to be afraid of making mistakes. To do something different, it's part of the process. So, and I speak with impact investors that always say the same thing. They have nuances of risk analysis, etc. Look, you don't have like 2% of your portfolio that are moonshots. There's like 1% of a possibility of that technology to be able to move the needle in climate change. Isn't it worth it? At least to try to do it? And if you that are called the impact investors don't do it, who's going to do it? So I think that we have a power of example that we should take advantage, maybe a little bit more, of how to, have those communities take a little bit more risk, and we lead by example with this. I think we should. Okay, thank you very much. So we'll become contagious based on vision and values, adapting to the reality as required, and certainly communicating a lot more. Not only the achievements, but that sense of hope. Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you very much, Don Roberto, Paul, Mauricio, Antonio, Sean. We have been really very fortunate of having you in different times of our history, taking firm steps to advance our vision, and really hearing those stories firsthand helps us understand how much we've learned, how much we've grown, and how innovative and important this great experiment has been. And now we'll have a short break for refreshments. You'll find it upstairs through where we came in, where you'll see a round table here around close to the conceptual frameworks, like an album of what was conceived those 20 years ago, if you want to look at some of those pictures. And I remind you that we have the interviews at the back. If you want to leave some comments, we would appreciate that. We'll come back here to start our second panel at 10:50. Enjoy the coffee, the snacks, good company. Thank you very much.
Bring your coffee. All good? Now we're going to start. Please take a seat. Welcome back. Hope you've enjoyed the coffee and a very nice exchange amongst you, which I'm sure is the hardest part to stop. Oh well, now I have the pleasure of introducing the next panel. Now we're going to hear from some of the leaders who are currently leading the organizations of the VIVA system so that they can talk to us about the new responses of the ecosystem to the Latin American challenges. With that said, I welcome Catherine, Andres Elfid, Alejandro Urs, and Andreas Sagenberg, who will be moderating the panel. Welcome, everyone. Please go ahead. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thanks to the organizers. It's spectacular to be here. It's definitely inspiring, so inspiring that our founder and his legacy have evidently, well, Stefan inspires us and leaves us with a lot of homework and tasks to fulfill and implement. And that's what it's about. When 20 years ago, when VIVA Trust was created 20 years ago, my apologies, 1 second. It was an experiment, innovative, a unique experiment, and we left many tracks how we've seen footprints, but there's still a long way to go, and that inspires us is the reason of being, and that's what we want to talk about today. There's values and attributes from VIVA that are still permanently present, such as innovation, continuous learning, disposition, the willingness to take risks, the resilience at the times of a crisis, not giving up, and the creation of bridges among different actors of society and economy, particularly in the entrepreneurial and the business world and the civil society sector world. I also want to talk about another bridge today, and it's the generational bridge. 20 years. It's a time to look back, like we did on the panel that we just heard, especially seeing the future, where we're at right now, how are we interacting today, and then what are we going to do in the future? What accomplishments, what ambitions do we set ourselves so that we have accomplishments to applaud, perhaps not in the following 20 years, but maybe in the next 5 years? How can we improve the ecosystem that we've created among these 5 organizations? How can we improve the engrenage? And that's what I want to talk about with all of you, the ones who are present here. Welcome, Catherine, Andres, Urs, Alejandro Elfid. It's going to be a pleasure to talk with you. We have 3 blocks. One's going to be a bit about learning from the past, but not from the ones who were in the past, but from the ones who are here today working on this. The second one on the present, how are we interacting about the future and about the ecosystem. What can each organization do to improve the ecosystem? Before that, I want to make a little intervention, 2 minutes on each one, so that they can present the organizations to the audience. Because, well, I'm very happy that we're not just old friends today, we're also new leaders in each organization. So very interested. Maybe those, maybe not everybody knows what MarViva does. Maybe not everybody knows what Fundace does. So I want to give you the word for about 2 minutes. so that each one can present their respective companies, what they're doing today. I'm going to start with the productive sector. Alejandro, please go ahead. Thanks, Andres. Well, I have the honor of representing Maciza today. Maciza is a company whose origins date 1960. We're in the city of Valdivia after the earthquake, the strongest registered record in the history of humanity. Chile is a high earthquake country, and this sector in the South Chile was affected by that earthquake. A group of entrepreneurs decided to create this production floor for conglomerate boards, and then we had a long growth process, investments, after some de-investments, and now they were focused on production. Production and the commercialization of products that are focused on the production of furniture, architectonic solutions, construction solutions. We have 4 production floors, 2 in Chile, 1 in Mexico, 1 in Venezuela. And we have a presence, a very strong commercial presence in 7 countries. We have a bit over 2,000 collaborators. Well, we've also had a series of allies for commercializing products that we can't manufacture ourselves and provide the solutions that I've already mentioned. Thanks, Alejandro. This first route, we're going to do a left-to-right order. Fundis, the most ancient organization in the ecosystem. Hello. Thank you. Yeah, well, next year, Fundis is going to be 40 years old. And like the other organizations from the group, what it seeks is to become, it's looking at for sustainable development. The thesis is that this can be attained if we leverage micro companies, small, medium, and micro companies, because there means when we do, when we work on our 17 sustainable development goals, we can always explain how somehow if we work with micro companies or small companies, we can contribute to gender equality or income equality or poverty reduction or improving employment or the ecosystem, but also to nutrition systems, and we can go on and on. So I think it's a good reference point. This was the hypothesis from the starting. 40 years we haven't changed that purpose, that goal. But we have tried different approaches. At first, access to funding, then access to knowledge, and the know-how of how to manage a company, then access to markets and supply chains, and then access to more dynamic and digital systems. And well, each 3 to 5 year cycle, we find a new wave to ride. And I'll tell you a bit more about the one that we're at right now. But in these 40 years, Fundis has been able to work with about 1.5 million micro companies. And each one of those is a family that can improve its incomes, that can more efficiently become part of formal systems, that can learn how to do things differently, that can become agents for change for many of the other sustainable development objectives as well. And I also think that just like the other organizations, we're not doing this on our own. Well, first, we do this with a very talented team that's distributed in the entirety of Latin America. We work in 17 countries. And in each country and each region, we always work with our allies, who can be private sector companies, multi-Latin, multinationals. In these 40 years, we've worked with over 100 multi-Latin and large companies in the region, but also practically with every government in the region and every multilateral. And also, trusted, we've been able to preserve and expand the network with Switzerland among our allies. There's at least 12 to 15 of the entrepreneurial, business, and philanthropic organizations there in Switzerland, and they accompany us in many projects and initiatives. So, well, it's a bit of what Fondes is today after 40 years. Thanks, Sylvie. From the most ancient to the youngest one, not that young. It's VIVA idea has been in the family for some years now. Urs, please. Thanks, Andrea. Thanks, Andrea. Yes, it's true. The differentiation with all the other organizations, this is the smallest one. Now we have 15 employees. VIVA idea was created in 2013. That was a time when Stefan Smidani was suffering legal attacks in Italy and also personal attacks. The ecosystem made it clear that he needed to be protected, and his reputation also needed protection, not just personally, but also the organizations that were related with him and his person. At these times, it also became clear that we can't just go to the press to explain that Stefan Svigani is a professional and an ethical person, and the brilliant idea from Roberto Artavia came in and they said, we need to document and distribute the impact that Stefan Smidani has had in Latin America, and in this way to explain that this work generates a great contribution as part of the global sustainable development, and the mandate was born there. We're analyzing, documenting, and distributing Stefan Smidani's legacy. So now we can say the word legacy is not just something that belongs to the past. We all know that we're all children. Somehow we have children. A legacy always has two sides. On the one hand, it's a limitation, and on the other one, it's an opportunity. That's precisely the word, the idea in Viva Idea. We must identify this part of the legacy where there is knowledge in the ecosystem that will help the ecosystem to replicate its success for the following phases. That's what we did. That was the first step of development, focusing on social entrepreneurs. And Sean came in sometime and says, well, you're committing the same mistake that we did at start before the first change, focusing on the individuals. Nowadays, you're focusing on collective changes. We made a change there. Nowadays, we're focusing on the creation of instruments that will help leaders handle their collective impact. Perfect. Thank you, Urs. Andres, Avina, well, thank you very much. What an honor to be here. Thanks for receiving us. A lot has been said about Avina. I want to remind you that when Avina was founded by Stefan in 1994, he did so with two elements, key elements. One was he wanted to associate with civil society leaders and business leaders as well in his initiatives of sustainable development, meaning he recognized that at the local level there are all the capacities necessary to generate the changes that Latin America need. So as a first hypothesis, I think it's very valuable. And this was called locally led development at first. Before it had the name, Stefan saw this. And this visionary yet humble, he said, I don't know exactly what to do. Let's go look for these leaders, but I also want to create Avina as a permanent learning organization, an organization that is open to learning. So from that experience, successes and mistakes, we realized it wasn't enough to identify these leaders, but to connect them in networks, and then that it was necessary to channel those actions based on a clear reading of the opportunities. We needed to create changes, deep changes, so it was necessary to be able to read the context, identify those opportunities provided to us by the context, and to be able to channel the collaboration among all the sectors between many leaders to generate changes that would be really deep, that would be of great scale and also very long-lasting. Avina nowadays, who holds its strong connection with Latin America, is projected beyond Latin America and promotes this collaborative process for systemic changes, mostly in three main axes: climate action, innovation, democratic innovation, and the construction of a more fair and regenerative economy. Perfect. Thanks, Andres. Finally, Catherine, welcome. VIVA. Thanks, everyone. I'm honored to be part of this panel and to share the space of celebration and also reflection. Well, VIVA Foundation is born. We're the youngest ones in the ecosystem. However, thanks to Ms. Erica's vision, life partner of Stefan, we were born 20 years ago with a focus on promoting a vision of a biodiverse ocean, a healthy ocean, to benefit of present and future generations. Ms. Erica always had the conviction for development and conservation of ecosystems, ocean, marine ecosystems, for them to be something, for this to be something that would complement each other and develop mutually. So we started advancing along those lines. And something else in which Erica believed in, well, I didn't have the luck to meet her in person. However, by studying and reviewing Marviva's and her legacy's documentation, Ms. Erica believed that we had to express ourselves, that ocean preservation requires many voices to speak, to make proposals, and also to point out things when they're not working properly and to work together to improve them. So it's a vision that is still very alive nowadays, truly. It's not something that's changed. But yeah, at the operational and programmatic level, the vision, the work done by Marviva has been resilient and has been adapting to the challenges and the complexities of promoting the conservation of something that is so strategic and relevant in the politics, and that brings in so many actors along those lines. In the beginning stages, Marviva focused a lot in promoting and doing ocean vigilance and control actions. They had their own shipping processes that made them very visible with governmental allies, and always had a very strong political incidence component. Years later, you can say that Marviva's basis is working with scientific basis, and nowadays we have 4 strategic axes: spatial marine planification, effective fight against ocean contamination, especially one-use plastics, promoting responsible consumption and production schemes, and community strengthening in the coasts. Thanks, Catherine. With this, we're going to start with the first block that comes from the past, but I welcome you to start thinking from the first block to think about today and the future. We heard the previous panel and the ones who were present last night, the amazing explanations by Nando and Roberto. There's a lot that we've been able to accomplish. And seeing it on the macro side, the world still polarized, perhaps even more than 20 years ago, which makes our presence, our task, our calling to be a bridge between the sectors that are polarized. It makes it even more necessary. But I don't just want to talk about these needs. I also want to talk about the accomplishments. So I welcome each one of you to think and perhaps to share, maybe to have more time for the other 2 blocks, but think about one challenge that you're proud of in your organizations, and one gap that you've identified in regards to our mandate. Who wants to be the first? If not democratically, then we would say Elfie. Well, it's hard to choose between one. I would say that the greatest accomplishment from Fundes in all these years that we've been able to position the topic of the micro and small company in the agenda of all of the regional actors. So today, I think this is a common ground. Everybody is talking about it. When we read about micro companies, the first paragraph is almost always 99% of companies in any country in America or in Latin America are micro companies. So 40, 30, 20 years ago, that wasn't the case. And the most interesting thing is that in those 40 years, there's also being ups and downs, because sometimes the topic becomes important, gets trendy, everybody wants to support small businesses, and all of a sudden there's a period of darkness, and then it comes back up. The topic comes back when the conditions are favorable, when everything's buoyant, when the countries start to take off, and then everybody wants to support micro businesses. And same is when problems arise, then we have to create jobs and see how we solve this. When things are so-so is when the topic goes under the surface. But in all this time, we've been adding governments, development organizations, and most importantly, the private sector and the organized private sector, right? As a way of directly creating wealth and to distribute it better. And I think this has changed forever. So nowadays it's much less harder, because I remember that some years ago we had to almost evangelize every time we will talk about with someone about, well, this is what we do and this is important because of A, B, and C. I think that now there's a wave of expansion in which it's very hard to find someone who doesn't know why small businesses or micro businesses shouldn't be supported. So the most important, something important thing about the population is that nobody is again supporting the development of micro businesses, on neither side of the spectrum, whichever that spectrum is. On the one hand, it's an ally to promote pro-business values and, let's say, innovation, etc. And on the other hand, it's also a focus to cover the needs of the least favored ones. So if there's something I must say, is that this is something that has been built, and it's not a task that has an end. We keep doing it every time we talk with someone, every time we're going to meet with a client, an ally. I think is the most transcendental contribution that we've done so far, and an accomplishment at the same time. Perfect. Thanks, Selfie. Definitely, it's definitely a footprint. Who else? Andres? As you wish. It's a very uncomfortable situation because we have my colleagues looking at me. It's like, yes, go ahead. I'm going to simply choose to say, having learned to operate in a polarized context, this logic of collaboration makes possible that when the conflict arises, conditions for systemic change are created, particularly because of that expression of conflict. I'm going to give an example. This case that was paradigmatic for us because it somehow triggered a reflection that made the collaborative process strategy express. This was the case of the Chilean energetic matrix. So Argentina, at some time, as usually, we don't follow our words. So we cut energy into Chile. Chile went into a crisis, and it decided to advance with alternatives for production of energy to satisfy the energy demand in this country, and decides to build a dam, a series of dams in the south of Chile. Many of the images that we saw in the south of Chile is a magnificent place, but also with a lot of conservation value. And there was a group of activists that mobilized to stop such construction. At the same time, the companies that were already had the concessions of the building of those networks were really concerned because they weren't abiding to the lawful state, to the contracts. So both sectors, because of which we had a social capital built for many years, they look for us and they share their concerns with us. A very legitimate concern. The interests of each one of these sectors were legitimate. In Avina, they would find an organization that would recognize this legitimacy. And we decided not to work in the conjunction, not to work in the conflict where the polarization was manifesting itself, but to look for those points in which we agree. And we quickly discovered that we were all agreeing with having an energy matrix of the future that would make sure that it would be affordable, that it would be sustainable. And then we started to agree on basic points upon which we would build scenarios. This allowed us to go from, in a few years, to dreaming with a participation of 5% in renewable non-conventional energies in Chile to a 34% this year. The participation in Chile of renewable non-conventional energies was of 34%, and it's still growing exponentially. Perfect, Andres. Really good example. Who else? Catherine, go ahead. What a nice question. I had a hard time identifying something that would be representative on this conjunction and taking into account the challenge of polarization. This is why I choose this one. VIVA has been very successful knowing how to articulate sectors, positioning itself as an organization with such credibility, with such rigorosity in its actions that it generates very strong trust with the productive sector, with NGOs, with the academies, and with the education sector and all relevant actors in the ocean preservation area. It is usual, and I'm going to give an example in my context in Costa Rica because I didn't mention this before, but the organization is based in Costa Rica, Panama, and Colombia, and we emphasize in the Oriental Tropical Pacific. In the case of Costa Rica, we hope, we expect from our VIVA to have a technical criteria to issue technical criteria on the marine agenda, and based on that, we've also had a lot of opportunities to leverage initiatives that are very specific in the benefit and support of all these sectors. And here, make a quick jump to another example, and it's a way of relating with the coastal communities in the three countries. The approach is empowerment, and it has a lot to do, and we may see this in the following question, with it's a lot to do with the challenges that we're facing with this polarization, the new one that is very geared towards information as a way to disinformation that makes our democracy in our countries at risk. And this is a situation that we're all facing, but at the community level, VIVA shows a lot of interest and attention on well-being, social well-being, empowering these communities in such a way that it is them who can directly handle their incidents necessities. And so they find an ally in VIVA to acknowledge institutionality, understand governance, to strengthen leadership, and eventually be resilient enough in the face of these changes, political, structural changes. VIVA cannot do all of the work, of course, but it finds these allies, and at the same time, it offers these innovative tools to improve their productivity, their wellness, in themes, for instance, such as the VIVA standard for responsible fishing that we've developed and identified commercial allies, and we've been able to formulate a proposal based on science, and that now again, it leverages the credibility that VIVA has been building on along the years with its team. And in this context, we must be ready for a lot of uncertainty, and it's very important to have this capacity of adaptation to adversity, but above all, to have a very good relations with these actors that we also need in order to assure a real impact. Perfect. Thanks, Catherine.
Alejandro, go ahead. Well, I think that the greatest achievement that we should feel proud of this company is that since we became part of the ecosystem, we have been able to make consciousness within the organization and in society of the importance of the concept of the triple result in sustainable development. And in that sense, since a little bit over 2 decades, taking all of these concepts, Masisa has been a reference, has been a pioneer, and many companies currently, fortunately, are in tune now. But this is part of the legacy that comes from VIVA, this incorporation of concepts through which Masisa has been recognized as a pioneer and a reference within its industry and in general, in not only in Chile but in the countries where we operate. I do believe that even if we participate a lot in several guild organizations and work groups, and also with public institutions and private institutions, we need to be a little bit more, or really take that leadership to try and become and make a difference. Thank you, Alejandro Urs. Thank you. The point where we're working is the way in which we are distributing that knowledge. The challenge that we face right now is that to understand how you are making changes, empowering fishermen, empowering large groups, you need to understand deeply the difference of what it means to have leadership in these environments. And that, for us, is a big challenge to explain this to third parties that are not part of the family of VIVA Trust. If we want to do this, we should learn from Stefan Suntini and Mr. Leonis said we have big challenges in the environment, but also more urgently, we need to make changes quickly. To make this quickly, we need to use this paradox to think deeply, to focus on the essential elements and not to lose time in fads or fashion. Our challenge is we're distributing the knowledge and the legacy of the ecosystem. We have examples that we're presenting here around. But within, for example, here in universities, situations that the students don't want to read. They don't want to think deeply. And if we have a situation like this, we need to adapt in the way in which we are distributing your knowledge to the environment. What are we doing, for example? We did an assistance to the bank development here in Costa Rica. Roberta makes some consulting based on all the frameworks of the ecosystems, and then we came in and we were helping the development bank system that helps distribute funds to micro and small companies. And the challenge there was how can we help MyPymes provide more access to financing. And in that process, we used a lot of legacy from Fundes and generated a digital instrument. And in the end, someone who's learning of how you can prepare a MyPymes for access, you're focusing on instruments resolving the problem directly, and you don't need to think deeply. That's an instrument that we finished, and now we're using another project to replicate this project in Costa Rica in Central American level with the Central American Policy Organization. And what we are looking for is to change the distribution of knowledge based on deep knowledge of each of the concepts. We're generating instruments that we hand off to leaders to resolve problems directly. It's interesting to see that if we're speaking with them based on results and very concrete results, they're open to talk about the concepts that we have there. They want to understand more deeply what's behind this, and that's what we're doing. Perfect. Thank you very much, Urs. Due to time, we're going to try to combine blocks 2 and 3 because I think it's very important that we talk about block 3. And block 3 is what's coming, right? And block 2 would be where we are today, but I think that a lot of where we are today is already mentioned in that sense. If you want to add anything, you can incorporate in your answers to block 3, but definitively what's coming. I invite you not to think about your organizations, but to think about the VIVA ecosystem. I think it's very important that there we all recognize that we still know each other, but halfway we perhaps know each other at a very high level of exchanges that are very specific. But I think that still there's a lot more opportunity to go deeper, to strengthen those bonds of working and creating a system that works. And I invite you to provide your thoughts. What could your organizations think of, in taking better advantage of the ecosystem, and what to offer better to the ecosystem than what you have done today? And for me, this could be the leading thread to move to our workshops tomorrow in the morning and the afternoon, because this panel wants to start the definition of the next 5, 10, 20, 25 years. So your intervention in this sense is very important, having in mind evidently our attributions, innovation, continuous learning, resilience, risk takers, etc., etc. Go ahead. Who wants to go first? Alejandro. And I believe, Andres and Paul was saying it in the first block, this possibility of performing synergies, because we are a bit heterogeneous in the group, but that doesn't prevent it to enrich the discussion, and particularly in Maciza, we can learn a lot about what the organizations are doing that are a lot more in that day-to-day. So it should be, I believe, the exchange of ideas. We work, for example, and you told me not to talk about what our organizations are doing, but we have a lot of collaboration, being conscious that we're a productive company. We have, obviously, the great responsibility of working collaboratively with public sectors, private sectors, social organizations. And in that sense, we have a lot of work with our neighbors, a lot of communications with universities. But perhaps we should, work amongst us and, learn a lot of what you're doing that we could apply. Perfect. And this exchange is more frequent that you suggest. Should they include what level of each company? I think it should be at a more operational level, because the exchange happens, I don't know, we have it 3 times a year, but we don't get into that much detail. I think that we need to get into a little bit more of the details and the strategies, action plans, and that's why I think that it should be a little bit more in the second line, let's say. I agree that this should be more or less the audience that is here, and not only at a closed doors. I think there's a lot of potential. Who else? Andres? Great. I love the invitation to think about in the future. I would like to share 2 things. One, I think it's super important that being conscious that the context where we're going to move on over the next years is going to be defined, or at least that's what we're living with from Avina, 3 elements. Uncertainty, we're going to operate permanently in a context of uncertainty and crisis. And therefore, it's a great opportunity to see the positive side of generating systemic changes. The second element is that we live in context, even if our proposal is long-term, we live in contexts that demand being immediate. So having the capacity as a group, as organizations, of reading the landscape and operate in that landscape, but looking at long term, it's crucial. Having a better reading of what's happening with our discussions and taking advantage of opportunities, I think it's key. And the third one, I think the most important one, is that we're going to live in a context of permanent involvement of our institution. So everything we have built so far has been questioned permanently in each of the cities. There's colleagues that could not come because Guatemala is closed, and that's going to continue happening, and we cannot prevent what's going to happen exactly, but we do have clarity that there's deep questioning, that's permanent crisis, that there's a demand of immediate solutions, but also that we need to think very outside the box to create new ways, new social pacts to operate. And that requires all of us. That in regards to the context in general that I think that we're going to be moving in the coming 5 years. And in terms of the ecosystem, I also have 3 points that I would like to share. One, I believe it's fundamental that and I took note of those elements that we have in common, this connection with civil society enterprise, the impact, 1.5 million of small companies, that impact is super, super powerful. We have to be able to communicate that type of impact. We need to have a collaboration that's inclusive in conditions of equality and justice, and we have to be more courageous. We don't have only that license to take risks. We have the mandate to take risks. We have this mandate to think beyond, think outside the box. We know that the crises that are coming are huge, the climate crisis, the inequality crisis, the governability crisis. We need to think outside the box and dare to bet on, and we need to bet on innovation within all of our organizations, and that clearly being coherent with our DNA. And finally, to think with a projection of more longer term. Think about the next 20 years for each of the organizations, for each of the members in the ecosystems, but also with all the other actors with which we collaborate with. Perfect. Very good inputs to have in the workshop. Urs? I want to contribute 2 topics. One is very obvious. We need more women in the leadership role. That's the first one. And the second, to position ourselves as an ecosystem that's disruptive in the environment, we need the space to think what is the topic where we want to be disruptive in. Historically, Stefan Schmidt-Heine, we have this mandate to focus on integration of impact and enterprise. We have the topic of eco-efficiency, but we need to generate something that is the baseline, but is beyond those topics. And Avina has an idea that I really like, which is the future space of thinking outside the box and thinking collectively on key topics where we want to generate impact. Possibly, it could be an idea that we are replicating this idea at an Avina level, at a Terra Group level. Very interesting. Thank you, Urs. Catherine. Well, several things have been mentioned, but a common umbrella with a climate crisis, number one. Second, in a shared yearning of seeing that social progress in our countries, in our regions, in Latin America, but also being realistic of the challenges that we face. And in the case of VIVA, and you spoke about being disruptive, in this line, defending science, defending scientific evidence is not only logical, but we're being disruptive because there's a link that pushes to the contrary, and I think it has to do a little bit about thinking outside the box, support each other mutually to continue being able to be vocal, that resilience with that complexity, with the risk that our institutions have, with the structural lacks that prevents us from bringing that social improvement. And in Marviva we have clear concepts of what we can do, where we can improve, where we don't have clarity on how far we can go with the support of the ecosystems. And I think that it would be very valuable here to have this space, not only in the framework of the workshop, but to do networking with everyone that is here today and identify those routes, those opportunities to discover our true potential as a team and continue in a very coordinated manner this mutual support in face of the goal that we have in common. Super, thank you very much, Catherine. Thank you. I'm thinking about it in two dimensions because if you see the ecosystem of VIVA Trust, I think that the focus and the specialization of each of the organizations in the group is playing a role in an ecosystem. And the other day, Jorge was giving us the definition of what the ecosystem is, and in biological terms. And I think each of us have a role within its own individuality. If we put together these objectives, we really create an ecosystem. So I sometimes don't see necessarily as a lack or a gap finding specific initiatives to work together, because I think that we're already doing it as part of an ecosystem. That is possible because each one has had a purpose, a specific purpose for which they were created for, and has had a path of several years to specialize in it. So that's the first dimension where I see it. Now, where we in fact have a lot that we can do is in learning and being complementing. In learning, because every time I have the opportunity to speak with some of the members of the teams of the organizations in the group, be it in terms of the history of the organization or specific initiatives, there's always one of us that's a couple of steps ahead or a couple of steps behind. And undoubtedly, when I hear, for example, things, I say, that already happened to us. So how am I able for your learning curve to be shorter? I think that could be a contribution in efficiency, in organizational efficiency, where we can help each other a lot. And complementing each other, I think that requires a lot of more understanding of what each of the pieces of the ecosystem does. Not only to think about a project in conjunction, but to really know where I have to go deeper in my specialization to be able to do, to complement the functions of others. And in dinner with Catherine, we exchanged, if we spoke about a project in Marviva, the question is, okay, up to where the strength of Marviva gets to, and where do they need to, when do they start needing the strength of other organizations that could be within the ecosystem? And as we spoke earlier, maybe it's not in this ecosystem, but we have to go out and look for it in another point. So I think, complementing each other and learning would be the two elements that I would highlight here. Perfect. Thank you very much, Elfie. And definitely, from my perspective and knowing, perhaps with the exception of Marviva that I know a little more distantly, I agree very much with what you say, that already the fact of existing and how we work amongst each other, we already form an ecosystem, but there's a lot more that we can do. And I think that the first act, from my perspective, is to come into the mind of each collaborator that the rest exists. With this, we would have achieved a lot. That's almost automated, that each person in Fundes knows, what you said, there's maybe this topic, this is not for us, but that could be something for Marviva, or something in Avina says that, look, that's a concrete example. We spoke about it yesterday. Value chains, training of small workshops in Mexico. Hello, Fundes. Treating plastics. We're building a public treaty for plastics. Right. So that's more of a specific project, looking in each organization, that it permeates throughout the organization, what it is that the other organizations need to generate this automation of thinking about the others. And evidently, this ecosystem doesn't resolve everything, but it resolves a lot, and for everyone together. In that sense, we have 2.5 minutes, and I'm Swiss, so 30 seconds each for one last phrase. When we come back in 5 years, celebrating the 25 years, what achievement could we applaud as an ecosystem? One phrase. What do you think? What achievement could we applaud as an ecosystem in 5 years? Who dares go first? Urs. We're already visible as a role model for others, and we're able to replicate the model to other places in the world. Very good answer. Kat, I have an ambitious one. Strategic innovation and inclusive for multi-sector action facing the climate crisis. Very well. Alejandro, working collaboratively for the development of successful organizations in successful societies. Andres? Or Elfie? We have generated a systemic change with the collaboration of all the members in the ecosystem. Excellent. Elfie? What I would like is that in 5 years we can continue counting the new waves that we find in the next 5 years, just as now we have these operational models and business models. What will be the next, that we have, not that we continue speaking about in 5 years about the same ones we have, but that we have innovated from operational, the business model and the way of escalating. That would be my ambition. Perfect. Thank you very much. And as you see, we've harvested a lot of achievements over these past 20 years, but there's still a lot to do as individual organizations and as ecosystem. And I think that with this panel, and evidently with the experience of the first panel, but with this panel, we have excellent input for today's workshop and tomorrow morning. In that sense, I just need to state that there is a lot to do, but we are enthusiastic in tackling on those problems, and let's get on to work. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andrea, Sabin, Urs, Catherine, Alejandro. I think I'm missing one. Andres. It's truly a luxury to have you in front of the organizations in the VIVA ecosystem, and I love hearing about how you continue innovating and also about the ambition that perhaps you have for the ecosystem. Really, the work that you do fills me with pride. I'm very proud of knowing that I'm part of the ecosystem next to you. Thank you very much. Now, we want to change a little bit the rhythm and actually open the space to you, our audience, but also our family primarily. You've heard about the values from Stefan, about the beginnings from Viva Trust, about the impact of the Viva ecosystem, and how they continue innovating, and we continue innovating towards the future. Now we would love to share with you the microphone with you for in no less than 1 minute, minute and a half, no more than 1 minute and a half. You could share what you have learned, felt, or seen this morning that is valuable to you. You can really share anything that you want to share, but please try to respect that time so we can hear from most of or at least some of you. Over there, Herman, thank you very much. Good day, Herman Castellanos from Córdoba. From what I'd like to make this reflection, having been one of the first associates of Avina in Latin America, but that 14 years ago I'm out of Avina. So I would like to use the figure of the iceberg. So when we talked about impact, when we talked about achievements, And I understand that you are able to see the visible portion of the iceberg. And there's a deep part, intense one, where we have a very marked DNA of everything that we've generated as groups that is invisible, but it's visible when you look at it. I mean, I can imagine Stefan in any of these meetings that has nothing to do with Avina being able to link those invisible threads that bring us to things that we thought about 20 or 30 years ago. So, what do I see? That there's an apparent contradiction. The deep changes that happen in society don't have an owner. So, from the beginning, we said we don't want to appropriate the changes. The changes are of those that participate, execute, etc. But there has been an incredible value in generating purpose, in generating content. So what's left for Stefan? Gratitude. Yes, very thankful. But never the changes done by Marviva or Avina or Inkai. The changes are the conjunction, that serendipity, where the protagonists appropriate the change. So I would love to differentiate this of being very thankful and very grateful with the experience with Stefan, with Peter, with all the universe of people that allowed us that I was allowed to know through Avina. But, knowing a lot of things that happen in our countries today have an origin of what we spoke about 20 years ago. Thank you.
It's part of that DNA that we've got. Definitely. Thank you. Over here, Jorge. Thanks, Jorge Jimenez from Viva. To emphasize, perhaps one of the lessons that I carry with me from this morning is that an ecosystem is more than the elements, than a group of organizations. It's more than the will of the elements or the organizations. There's a series of conditioning the ecosystem gives the organizations, and I think that this remains a challenge within the group. We must condition even more and also to force greater integration. I think Delphi was talking about learning curves. In Marviva, we've hit the wall many times on things that Fundis has been dealing with from 15 years ago. And if we had a better interaction with Fundis, we wouldn't be suffering that. We have a reduced communication team. However, we have a VIVA idea. They're experts at communication. So where's the interaction that will allow us to maximize the ecosystem's performance? And I think that's one of the challenges that I take with me from this morning. Thanks, Jorge. A comment over here? Microphone's on the way. First here and then there. Thank you. One thing I want to explain about Stefan that is more on the business side. I'm a founder of Moises Bertoni Foundation, which started working with the environment. We do much more now. Stefan was visiting. We made an organization. See, he was like the king of the world in that way, or we were all. We were working for that in every meal, every time of the day. What we wanted was to clean the rivers of Asunción. And of course, some companies were dumping things into the river, and the rivers were red with blood. So before dessert, he said, okay, $1 million. All right. And we went to all countries looking for people who knew how to process blood. And meals, etc. In Chile, we found, and with our Chilean partners, we created Lican. Lican now provides about 50% of the money that we need in the Moses Bertrani Foundation. Thanks. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name's Ricardo. I'm part of the Mestiza team. I want to connect a bit with the initial question about what's the feeling that we arrived with and what do we feel now. I think this feeling of insecurity is close to everybody. What's going to happen in the future? How do we face the challenges that will emerge? And as a production company, those are no minor challenge. And part of the team who's here from Aziza knows this. But my feeling after this first phase, and I think it will be much greater as we advance with the process, is completely different. In Mestiza, we say that together we are Mestiza, and today I get a very general idea, but it is very powerful, and it's that all of us together, we are life, VIVA. And in that way, we'll be able to face all the challenges that are ahead of us. Thank you very much. I love it. Love it. Here, Mr. Hector. Thanks, Hector Vargas from Mexico. Perhaps I'm been invited to this meeting. I may be the one that has the deepest feeling because I'm apparently the dean. I just want to say one thing. And this gathering is in honor of Stefan Schmidheiny because of his cosmovision. I got here, he was even younger than me. He always had a very clear idea towards Latin America. Latin America has a big problem. It can be a region that is rich in itself, but that lacks many, many things of value in regards to value, order, etc. And Stefan captured this very well, but towards a vital point, which is poverty. And poverty is solved with employment, with work. And therefore, that's why Fundis started under the name of sustainable development in order to give jobs to small, medium businesses. And so, and of course, micro. And that's his goal. And afterwards, all of these ideas arose, all these projects came in. And today, I'm really proud to be here, not just to see the present, well, yeah, the present, because we're living it and we're enjoying it, but not just seeing the past, but seeing the future. And the way that I see it is, it's a future that is full of hope, full of faith, and of what we're after. So I think Stefan gives us a very firm and clear legacy that will keep living for many years. Congratulations to the youth who's here and to all the organizers. It's an honor to me to be in Costa Rica. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Hector. We're working here, yes, excellent. Can you hear me? Yes. Roberto Corres, I was hired by Stefan to direct the center that was in Miami in the initial stages of Avina, in which we did the expansion in Latin America within Stefan's conception of that Avina should be led and operated by Latin Americans without divorcing its Swiss origin and its roots, and above all, to bring ideas into practice, the vision, the values that bring us together here today. I see many faces, many familiar faces, and also some that I didn't, the youth. And I want to say this, There are very deep and solid roots already, very relevant roots, and not just because of what Stefan did with and for us Latin Americans, but above all because of all of what's been done in these years of existence. I just want to propose to you to always look into those roots. I started working with Avina and the ecosystem towards 2024. I can certainly tell you that practically every day, something that I lived in those 4 years, something that Stefan and I talked about, we were taking this practice in Latin America, is still inspiring this message that I think is the most important for our continent. Thank you. Thanks, Roberto. Hello, I'm Theo Mahosha. I work in Avina. I will switch between languages because, yes, we're Latin American, so I wanted to speak in Portuguese as well. I'm amazed of all the inspiration that's been given by Avina. I was a leader of Avina as well. I've worked with the organization for many years. Our collaboration potential is huge. We can explore it. We should explore it as a group and between the groups. This is something that I would like to mention is a commitment. And I think we need more female leaders as well in the region. Thank you very much. Thanks, Selma. Thank you. There's one here. We'll go there first. Hello, how are you doing? Good afternoon, everyone. It's Luis Artieda, Mickey. I work in Avina. I've been working for 12 years there. I wanted just to share my feeling, which is gratitude, acknowledgement, and pride, actually. And I wanted to share a personal process that started 12 years ago in Avina Foundation. And it took me some time to understand Avina. And after being in this meeting, I feel like I understand everything. I'm a very structured person, perhaps too much. And when I got into Avina, it was hard for me to see how we have this freedom, this calling towards risk, the capacity to innovate. And I really mean this. This process took a few months, maybe a couple of years. And that's what I'm really grateful for. I think we've given ourselves the opportunity, all the ones who are part of this family, to grow. If we want to generate systemic changes in such complex realities as the ones that we live in, there's no other way to do it. The structure is very good, but we must take the risk. And I value this truly after knowing about the story of VIVA and this family that welcomes us. I now understand where we come from, and I also have a lot of illusion to see what we can improve later on. We share this feeling, many of us. Thank you. Paula Fonseca from Viva Iria. Well, I was hearing all the ones who are participating in the panels and such. I felt a lot of responsibility because on the one side we have all this history, everything what Stefan has done, the innovation, all the things that have been happening, and then there's another generation of leaders who are also coming in, innovating, they come out of the boxes, but we're all sitting here. So I was asking myself, what do we have to do? Super. Thanks, Paul. Does anyone else want to share? We still have a few minutes, perhaps 5 minutes. Please go ahead. Good morning, Manuelandia from our VIVA Foundation. In the world, there's two types of people, the ones who conform and the ones who take leadership and impulse, right? So I think all of us here are in one pole. So the challenge is to be able to convince the ones who are in the other side, the ones who don't want change, the ones who are being conformists. I think that's our true goal. Thank you. Motivating and being contagious. We've heard that a lot. Love it. I'm Felipe from VIVA Idea. I want to tell you a story. I started with this company in 2015, working with Roberto in a consultancy, I remember. I'll never forget in my first trip to Jubilarda, where I understood where this came from. I always felt rebellious. I like management economy, poetry. I didn't see how to make everything fit together. And it was in this trip that I understood that there was a long process towards sustainable development that in America Latina that came from Stefan and the work that Roberto did and how that started growing in Argentina. And I think that for some reason, Jorge Bronda says that in Argentina is where Stefan, the vision of Stefan really germinated. And I think that at that time I didn't feel more alone in some way. But I didn't feel like a rebel anymore. I was part of a process, a movement, a group that had a similar vision. And I love what Bricio said, that many times we're not so clear about what it is, but we know that it's important, we must do it, and we know that we must fight for it. So perhaps we've all been gone through an experience such as the one that I had in Jujuy, but without a doubt, being part of this group is amazing, and it gives us a lot of hope for the future. So thanks a lot for that. Thanks, Veli. Super. Anyone else? Yep. Hernando? Thank you. I want to speak because I'm impressed by what Hernán Castellano said about the iceberg. Every time I look at myself in the mirror, I feel much younger than I am. But there's a generational problem here, and a problem about in what ecosystems we're working on. If we go to Peru and we do what Stefan prohibited, how many have been affected by the property system funded and conceived by Japanese model that Peruvians have adapted to Peru? 30 million Peruvians, 4 chiefs of state that's been gathered for many days with Stefan. The Peruvian constitution, which is keeping the country together up until this time, was written in 1991-92 with the Swiss Ministry of Foreign Affairs. None of that's known. They will say, oh, well, those are old achievements. The property title system that the Chinese, the Belt and Road Initiative, of which was president in the first international session that we have, was based on the Peruvian system that Stefan created, and they know this. So these are not just accomplishments from the past, like past baseball games, like the U.S. people say, but these are things that are happening today. Yesterday, I showed some pictures where I was the president of these meetings in China, because I've never been able to mention Stefan so that I wouldn't get in trouble with the law, but doing business was a program that was carried out with Stefan's money and vision and his idea of taking risks. And the Washington consensus in the 10 points says property rights, among which Stefan was involved, and myself. And that is in force up until this day, because if the United States wants to replicate the Chinese, they will need to find a way to say that all private property that is on natural resources, and if you allow me to extend myself 30 more seconds, so natural resources of Latin America belong to people that he's helped get title, and nobody knows this because of this square Swiss way of not saying things, and then people forget the roots. But please notice how things are. The reason why the United States have been facing China now is because they've gotten them into their backyard. We're American Latina. We're about to become China's backyard. We got the greatest copper investments, the greatest port investments, infrastructure and energy investments. And the United States and Europe are in trouble with Russia in Ukrainian territory. And in regards to energy, what the Russians are doing is to cut energy to the Europeans. And they depend 50% on petroleum, carbon, gas. And to do so, they're liberating nuclear facilities, wind facilities, none of these fossil sources. My apologies. New energy sources, none of them travel through channels of copper between Chile and Peru. We have about 40% of the exportable copper of the world. Now we add Argentina. We have between Chile, Bolivia, and Peru. We have 60% of lithium, which is the one that stores that energy. And no one is seeing that what he did 30 years ago, because, well, they're not just as old as the one who knows this, because these things are relevant today. And that will affect the situation. Well, Peruvian promise 10 seconds. Talking about ecosystems, I was glad of the words that I heard from Urs. They've let Stefan to trap himself in Switzerland so that he wouldn't get into the legal system. No one has done the work that Stefan has done. The problem is not legal. The problem is that he has come out to compete in the fossil fuel field, and that it doesn't get defended, as the ex-president Trump would say in a court. It gets defended in the political realm, and if you don't get organized, he will remain imprisoned. So we must realize that they're not just micro-organizations, but the micro is super important politically nowadays, and it will determine the destiny. Thank you very much, Hernando. It's without a doubt a challenge. Interesting. All right, with this, I want to thank you. Well, I love listening to your comments. I feel that empathy and similar experiences that we've had, and I'm sure this has resonated, the experience of many has resonated with us, and that sets a lot of challenges for us in the future too. So really thank you for sharing. And the idea is to keep working towards the future. So with this, I would like to welcome Mauricio Biondi. Share some final reflections with us. As you saw in the first panel, Mauricio is another great ally of Stefan. He's been part of our history from the start of Avena Foundation for 10 years before the creation of VIVA Trust. So welcome, Mauricio. Thank you very much. Well, we've heard Stefan today. Not yesterday's Stefan, but today's Stefan, the one who speaks today. In a few words, but very, very deep. We've heard all the participants of the VIVA group. About the comments, I could talk for an hour or more about that, but in just one word is enthusiasm. Makes me think, and I'm going to be very brief because we've already talked a lot. I'm going to mention a conversation that I had when I was in the director's board of the Nueva group, where VIVA had just barely been created. And the question was between two, three people and Stefan. The question was, what should we do to implement this great idea, the VIVA idea, a program, an initiative? What should we do? We had like 40,000 ideas. And he said, nope, because we're the council. So the virtual aspect of the natural organic process of adopting the vision that VIVA implies, we didn't do anything. We let the bottom up grow. We allow the bottom up to grow. We don't interfere directly as councils, as a director's board. Today, we're celebrating 20 years of bottom up. We're gathering this. It's an impressive wealth. And how Andres said, we must simply gather the fruits. So, or we must simply pick it up, or what is number one of VIVA in these 20 years? In my perspective, it's to have survived. In what sense? The VIVA instrument for making a quantum leap progress forward is at the hand of the new generations. And that's a colossal merit. In spite of all the hardships that we've run into, and the bottom up is alive. In just half an hour, it's impressive what I felt in vibration-wise. It's impressive. We must simply integrate it and sort of say, phrase it in a more organic way now. There's something that could be conflictive, and I'm not very much a part of ecological movements actively, but there is something that from the outside I always carry inside: the words of Greta Thunberg, which accuse. We're not talking about diplomatic words, politically correct. It's accusations towards the leadership of these generations, in which some as older myself and other ones who are in the between, but not like in general at the global level, she accuses them of inaction, of cosmetic, makes accusations of fundamentally failing in the huge challenge that we have inside. VIVA has the possibility of responding in practical terms, in concrete ways, with 20 years of experience, aside from that challenge, and to make her or others of her generation take that instrument and take it forward. And not just take steps forwards, but like take quantum leaps, because we're here saying we're not talking about fixing little things. Either we change the paradigm completely. VIVA was born as a paradigm change. It hadn't been copied or replicated yet. Why? Because it's very hard to do so, changing mentality. The new generations are telling us. So there's a possibility here, a huge possibility, that due to the merit of VIVA, of having survived, now we can serve society in a way that even now we hadn't dreamed of. But with just listening to you, I'm already starting to dream. And Stefan, as a dreamer, may also consider this consistency. I would say that's it. Congratulations for what I've heard in this last hour. Thank you. Thank you very much, Virgil, for those inspiring words and the challenge also that they present to us as an ecosystem. Well, now, with this, we set the end of the content of this morning session. But as we saw, it's not the end. It's just one more step in this road that we're traveling together. I think we all feel the great pride that we feel in VIVA idea of being part of this family, of this vision and these values that are looking for, they're hoping that Latin America becomes a more prosperous, sustainable region and to feel motivated to continue with an increasing strength in this way that requires more and more from us. I now have the pleasure of inviting you to have lunch. In the backside of your carnet, of your car ID card, you'll find a table number in which you have been assigned a seat. Each table is a mix of the ecosystem. We really hope that you get to know more colleagues of the various system organizations. After lunch, I'll come back to give some more grateful notes and explain how the dynamics of the workshop and the conference will be for the afternoon. Also, as you'll see, you've been hearing some thunders, so there's a chance that there's a rains with wind. So what we're going to do is move the chairs so that the tables on that side don't get wet. So if you're located between table 1 and 7, you can please proceed to sit down. If you're between 8 and 11, give us a second so we can move them to this side. It's part of what we must improvise a bit on as we see what's coming. Thanks a lot. Enjoy your lunch. Bon appetit.